I encourage you to listen to the Farbrengen that we did. It was all 58 minutes. It's online for Yud Shvat. It's a good preparation for Yud Shvat.
You mean yeah?
The other day we Farbreng together, speaking about Rosh Chodesh Shvat and Yud Shvat, and it's important to prepare ourselves. Okay, let's go to the Mimer. We're on page 134, and now the Rebbe is going to summarize to us what the spiritual meaning of a table that the Isha Shunamis made for Ish Kadosh, Ish Elokim Kadosh, this holy man, and basically the Shulchan the table represents Shachris. And the Rebbe explained to us in the previous chapter, previous paragraph, that it refers to both Psuke de Zimra, which is L'zamer Aritzim, to cut away the bad and evil of the Nefesh Abamis, and just to leave its good part, which is its drive and passion. And then there is Birchas Krishma, the blessings that prepare us for Shema, which he spoke about yesterday. And its idea is the concept of humility, because if the angels who are our spiritual parents are humble before God and subservient, shouldn't we be that way as well? And we discussed it at length yesterday, and I encourage you to listen to the shir. Okay, let's go now to the last chapter. V'zehu, next chapter. V'zehu, and this is the idea. The Shulchan hu Psuke de Zimra ubiches Krishma, and this is why we say that the table in the verse in Tanakh, in Malachim 2, in Kings 2, where it speaks about the Isha Shunamis, and she said, "Prepare for our holy guest a room, and in the room there should be a bed," which we spoke about, refers to Krishma Shalamita, the evening Shema, and the Shema before we go to sleep, and the Cheshbon HaNefesh that we need to make. And then she says, prepare a table, and then she says, prepare a chair, and then she says, prepare a candelabra menorah. So the Rebbe says, V'akabona v'zehu, what is the intent? The Haveda, the Psuke de Zibra, or Birchas Krishma. It refers to the service, the activity, the askus of oneself while one recites verses of praise and Birchas Krishma. Primarily, these two sections of Shachris refer to making a dent, or better said, chakika, engraving in the Nefesh Abamis, la soisei kli bebeis chakikas amuris, to make it a proper vessel, a proper receptacle in two ways of engraving. Number one, engrave it from the outside. Make sure from the outside when you touch it, it has no splinters and it's smooth and all that. Spiritually, that means separate it from bad. Separate passion. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, as the famous saying goes, but separate the baby from the ugly bathwater. And the second aspect of engraving it from inside, for that it should become now a vessel for God. And you'll notice, that he says it should become a vessel for God, and he's referring to now Birchas Krishma. And what did he say Birchas Krishma is velvel? The avodah of bittul. In other words, before you can solidify and refine and come to a place of bittul, you have to get rid of the schmutz. And that's why we say, Sur me'rav aseh toiv. We say it in Hallelujahs and Shabbat, right? First, turn away from the evil, and then come good. So people say, well, Chabad is always saying, put on tefillin, put on the mezuzah, and you worry about your issues later. No contradiction. When you're talking about to someone who doesn't know from Aleph to Tuf, of course you say, put the tefillin on and do a mitzvah and get, one second. But when you're talking about to someone who knows better and who's learned, and or someone who wants to know the truth, you got to tell them Sur Mirah. If you don't have Sur Mirah, Asay Tov will never stick. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, my son Usher, is learning Megalemek right now. So he told me last week that I don't know what he was learning. He was learning, I don't know, Sikha, but the whole concept. Maybe even a higher? I don't know if it's a higher level. Maybe not. Maybe yes. Maybe no. Sur. How do we achieve sur meira? Davka ba'aseh tov. In other words, a person who's focused on aseh tov, right? It's going to distance a person automatically from ra.
That is a nice concept, and and also on a certain level, the emes. But that's not. I'm talking about the rudimentary, basic idea. And that's not what the pasuk means literally. The pasuk means literally sur mira and then vasei tov. What Usher is sharing is true, but it's when you're at it's a different experience. In other words, there's a time, and that time is needed many times, where the asay tov itself will bring to sur mira. That's true, but in other words, someone who's learning in a yeshiva, someone learned in yeshiva, and he knows he's doing something bad. Okay, there's simply stop doing the nonsense. Just stop it. You don't need here to be a philosopher and to be someone who's deep and knowledgeable. Just you want goodness and kindness and holiness to rest in you. You have to make a platform. You have to make like in the Gashmistika world. If you don't clean your house, how do you expect someone to come in and feel good there if it's full of garbage? So first thing is clean out the garbage, and then bring in the goodness, so the goodness will be appreciated. What he was saying is that there is an experience at certain times when a person is either not capable or the time is right for an overwhelming amount of tov to illuminate a situation. So let's take the Rebbe. The Rebbe at times would say, do something which was not the way people would do things, and that's why it caused alarm, frankly, where the frum world went bonkers, and they freaked out. They said, like, that's not the way the Masorah has been till now. And the Rebbe saw something from on high that no one else saw. So they were right from their perspective, and the Rebbe was right from his perspective, that he got a message from his father-in-law that now we should print Tanyas all over the world. What's this idea of printing Tanyas when people aren't learning the Tanyas? They don't even know what the Tanyas is. First, make a campaign that there's a holy book that you want to share with people. And no, the Rebbe says, print the Tanya, and then learn what the Tanya. In other words, so the Rebbe saw that the world needs at this particular time this revelation of Hasidism vis-a-vis the Tanya, and therefore he says, go for it. That's an asay toiv that supersedes sur meira. But that's a chidush, that's a novelty, and usually it can only come from a big tzaddik. Now, when someone who isn't religious, and you have a relationship with them, and you know them, and you know that, telling them to stop this and do this and do that is going to turn them off, of course you use the other method. But what I'm talking about is a regular situation. Anyway, enough said. So the Rebbe says here, the previous Rebbe says that the Psuki, the Zimra, consists of two activities, two avodas. One is Chakika b'bachutz, and one is Chakika b'bifnim. How do you make how do you make it a vessel for godly light? It's through bittul hatzior shal nefesh habamis. Here the wording is very precise. Look what he says here. through the bittul, through the nullification of tziyur. We have a tzayar with us. Moshe is a tzayar, a painter, a drawer, an artist. The word tziyur means a drawing, an image, an imagery. The first thing you have to do is you have to remove the tziyur of the nefesh habamis. Velvel. What is the tziyur of the nefesh habamis? It's the way the nefesh habamis draws and paints a situation. And the situation that it paints is always associated with shtus, with stupidity, with bad, with indulgences. Yes, Yoini.
So, a long time ago, something like 40 years ago, 38 years ago, we used to live in a place called Sheepshead Bay.
Yeah.
And Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, so we davened, there was only 2 Orthodox shuls, and there was the Young Israel, and then there was the Narola Shtibel, the
Yes.
Narola Rebbe. So we used to daven by the Narola Rebbe.
On Avenue U.
On Avenue U, yeah. So now he's in Israel now. Now he's the Narola Rebbe here in Israel,
Right.
in Bnei Brak. But so the Narola Rebbe used to tell me, always, I have sports and cup. He used to say, you have sports and cup. So I'm saying, this reminded me of what we're learning now, something from almost 40 years ago already.
Okay, so, thank you. By the way, Narola Rebbe Shapiro, he learned in 770, 1949, I believe, 48, 49. Anyway, so,
Wow.
so the tziyur, I want to talk a moment about the tziyur hara, Yonason. What's wrong with the tziyur of the nefesh habamis? The imagery of the nefesh habamis. In Tanya, chapter 11, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about the difference between a rasha of a tovla and a rasha of a raloi, a complete evil person and incomplete. The Alter Rebbe speaks about, he begins there saying, he quotes the Chazal say, Hirhuri ra, hirhuri aveira, koshem aveira. The thoughts about a sin are worse than a sin. And over there it's talking about, in matters of sexuality. That thinking about sexual things is worse than doing sexual things. Now wait a minute. Here it's ra, it's an action. Here it's only a thought. So one of the explanations is, and I believe Hillel again is not here today, he would be able to support it from a psychological perspective, is that the power of imagery and fantasy, as related in this case to sexuality, is a lot worse. Because it doesn't stop. Whereas the actual action, excuse the expression, it's a one-night stand, it's a one-night deal, it's a one moment of pleasure, and you go on. But the fantasy world is a very, very credulous world where it constantly works on you and it constantly drives you. And this has been studied. I'm not telling you any chidushim, and I don't want to elaborate more on it, but this is a fact. This is what I mean by tziyur. The nefesh habamis, and it's not just in matters of sexuality, it's in every area. By creating image, well, let's use the word fantasy, and that drives the person to bad, to no good, to unhealthy cravings. So the Rebbe says the first thing you have to do is you have to be mevatel, the tziyur, the imagery, the fantasy of the nefesh habamis. Then the nefesh habamis can shine with its passion, with its drive. But you have to get that bad image and fantasy out of it. And this is an avodah. This doesn't come from eating chont. This comes from realizing that you're a slave to your fantasy, to your imagery, to your tziyur. And who wants that? I want to be in control. I want to be a free person. I don't want to be ruled by a fantasy. I think that would be an explanation of what the Rebbe says here, being mevatel, the tziyur of the nefesh habamis. Let's continue. So let's see how the Rebbe says it. The nefesh habamis, it is koach hamasava, a power of desire and lust, or passion. A koach was will. In Yiddish, there's a word for to will something is vil or villain. So the Rebbe says, Velvel, that the Nefesh HaBamish is a koyach vos vil. It's a power of wanting. And the manner in which it expresses its taiva, its will, in Yiddish, next words, sein Velin, its will, who bekoyach godel, it's very strong. The verse says in Mishlei, there's an abundance of wheat coming through the power of an ox when the ox plows the field, compared to a little sheep plowing the field. You get very little produce. So we have an ox. The Nefesh HaBam is like an ox. And it's from there, from that part of the ox, of the Nefesh HaBam, is that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, comes. Hainu, shehu malbish as koyach hamisava. The Yetzer Hara enclose the power of desire b'tziyurim b'royim in evil images, the taivas of indulgences, gufnias, bodily ones, umidas rois, and bad midos. That's the tziyura. But the very core power of taiva, of passion, look at these words, is not bad in its very core. So by annulling, by nullifying the bad imagery, you're able at that point to transform as koyach hamisaveh, the power of lust and desire, l'toy, for good, v'lifel boi val yodei, and to use it and through it b'tziyurim toivim, by inserting that very power into good imagery, b'ritzoynes ruchniim, with spiritual desires, b'tfila b'tzibor, you become fascinated to daven for minyan. And it's in your blood. You won't travel if you don't have a minyan. You'll make sure you travel. Everything surrounds around the minyan. B'tfila b'kavana, number 2. And when you daven with kavana, and you won't allow anything to stop you. And to setting aside time to learning and not having anything disturb you. The Rebbe concludes these words. All this depends on your table. What type of table do you guys have? Do we have at night when we sit down with our family? If we do that, if we don't, we should start doing it. What are we discussing at the table? Politics? Lashon Hara? Car racing? Super Bowl? What are we talking about? Or we talk about those things a little bit too, but we say Divrei Torah. We ask how the day was. We ask each child, what did you learn? What do you think? What do you have to say? In Yiddish, was faratish by imiz. I love these words. Yoni, Yiddish. We look at what type of table do you have? What's that famous saying that it's been advertised? A family that eats together stays together, right? Shulchanoi shel odom. How much time do we spend thinking about how our table, both weekday and Shabbos, will be with our family, whether we have guests or we don't have guests? Do we take some time Friday and say, what type of table do I want tonight? Or maybe do we do it during Kabbalah Shabbos? I'm having guests. Are you going to forget about your family and just focus on the guests? Are you going to bring the guests into the family? How are you going to set up that table? The Rebbe says here that the table that this woman made for the holy man was very relevant to having a relationship with holiness. It's what's on your table. I could tell you just from my experience with my family. One of the things that my wife and I, Baruch Hashem, succeeded in is that, I can't say every night, but over the 37 years of family life and children, we've had mostly family dinner together every day, and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, and I see the benefit of it. And sometimes some of my kids are not doing it for whatever reason, and I'm a grandfather this time, I'm a Zayda, and I try to encourage my child to really implement that, because it's such a healthy thing. It really is so healthy. It's like you're rushing. And especially today with the usage of electronics and the phones, and this is something that I'm really on a path of to stop. And the usage of phones during supper, where phones ring, and it's to me it's asinine. It's wrong. It's not healthy. It's not good. Forget it. It's not good. And if it means shutting those phones off, taking them away, I mean, really, there's certain principles. We talk about, what can I kind of implement, or someone used the word force on my kids? And it's a sensitive issue. I've told you about the struggles I had with the girls, Matzah Shabbos, taking off the Shabbos clothing and putting on weekday clothing to go out Saturday night, and that really, rubbed me the wrong way. I come from a certain tradition, And Matzah Shabbos, you dress Shabbosdik. Wherever you go, you dress Shabbosdik. How much of a fight do you put up? How do you deal with that? The same was with the table, with the cell phones. Are you adamant? Put those phones away and turn them off, and there's no emergency. If you happen to have a house phone, if God forbid there's an emergency, you tell people, call me on the house phone. The nekuda is that it's an ongoing issue. Now, so how do I come to this from the Maimer, right? Moshe always talks about what practical instruction do we have when we learn Chassidus? If it's just a topic of discussion that's fascinating, wonderful, but we're not in college and we're not in yeshiva, we're in Bet Shemesh or Brooklyn, and we have to pay our bills and we have to raise a family and do what we have to. So the answer is, the Rebbe says, look at those words. These words should be pinned in everyone's house. Vos faratish bayim is. You want to know how your family will be and whether you'll be matzliach or not and all that? Ask yourself the question, what type of table do I have? That's what it says right here. It's not my words, guys. It's the Frierdiker Rebbe, the tzaddik. The tzaddik tells us. And this is why she made him velvel a table. What? The Ish Kaddish needed a table, Yoni? What did he need a table for? He has a bed. He wants to sleep. What does he need a table for? So that's what the Rebbe is being masber here. That's what he's explaining here. The table shows where he's putting his emphasis on. It's another step in the ladder of showing holiness. If you can't find holiness in the table, it's a problem. That's why, what does it say in Pirkei Avos? Someone doesn't say words of Torah at the table during a meal. It's like a disgusting meal. It's a Pirkei Avos. It's in the Mishnah. It's disgusting. Why? Because then you're showing that all your table is about is fressing, eating. Even if you eat properly, but still it's very basic and material and physical, animalistic, eating. When we eat, the eating itself needs to be demonstrative of holiness, of Kedusha. Says the Rebbe, the way you can come to that position is if you separate the imagery of the Nefesh Abamish, which is usually into unhealthy things, from the passion of the Nefesh Abamish, which is very important. And what does that mean? That means don't squash the will of a person. And we learned about this, I want to remind you, Chevre, in the Kuntras of education that the previous Rebbe wrote for his father as well. You remember there, and this is something I always remember, he says there, when it comes to educating and raising a student or a child in a healthy way, don't squash their will. Don't eliminate their ratzon. Because if you do, you lost them. And not only did you lose them, you've hurt them for life. And issues later of depression, low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and everything else comes from that. I remember when I was a little boy, probably 9, 10, 11, I started to draw little menschies. And I was fantasizing like a game. And then as a year or two later, I started to play basketball with my little menschies using a dreidel. I created an entire game. My brother jokes, "It's Chaim, today you should take it to Mattel or one of the Hasbury, one of the toy companies. You'll become a millionaire from your idea." But that's not the point I want to get to at. And I wonder. I wish I would have copies. It was very cutesy, you know. I mean, I wasn't a nice artist, but in my own way, I drew a man and a second man, and like I created some kind of competition and game. You know, at dentist's office in America, you all probably remember, they used to have a magazine called Highlights. You remember? The Highlight magazine. So whenever we went to the dentist, it was a very fun the publication to look at. It was oriented towards kids. And in a dentist's office, you know, a pediatric dentist, you have children. So you found them in those offices. And I said, wait a minute. I want to submit my little menschy drawings and writings of the story that I created to them. And I found a publisher on Nostrand Avenue in between Williamsburg and Crown Heights in the section called Bedford-Stuyvesant, which in my day was a war zone. And you wouldn't want to walk there even during the day. And I sent this out to him, and I got back an answer that he will publish it, and he sent me, I think, $10 or $15. This is in the 1970s, in the early 70s, I believe, or the late 60s. And my mother, Leah Sholem, encouraged me highly to do it. While my father basically said, "You're wasting your time." And my mother was adamant, and she said, "Don't listen to him. Do it. Send it in." And then later, when I started to write, she said, "Chaim, you see? You were a writer when you were 9, 10 years old." And I thought about this many times, how a parent saw in a child at such a young age and didn't crush and squash at that time what his will was. So therefore, the confidence and the self-esteem blossomed. And in face of all odds, I go ahead and I get a positive result. I have another example. These are just childhood memories. I want to make the point. I had a basketball. Now, Spalding, everyone knows, is the company that puts out all the good equipment for baseball and basketball and all football. Spalding. I bought a basketball on 13th Avenue here. I don't know if you remember the store, Linux. It's still there. It's I think a new owner, but it's a little store, and we lived at that time a block away, and to me and to my brothers, this was like going into a store with all games and toys, and it's a block away, and across the street is Amnum's Pizza. I mean, this is Borough Park 70s heyday, you know, like Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. For us, this was like, Candyland. And I bought the ball, the basketball. Well, pretty soon after using it a few times, it I guess hit a nail or it flattened, and I was very upset. So again there I said to my mother, I'm sending the ball to the company and I want a refund. My father said, what are you wasting? Every ball is, I sent it, they sent me back a brand new basketball. The nakuda is that you have to identify well where the person's will is at that time, in that particular situation, in that part of the life. And if you hone in on that, and you create a real healthy self. And this is something that when we sit together at a shulchan, at a table, with family, we're able to kind of put aside all of the gadgets, and we talk a little bit and relax, and you're really able to make the best of it. And that's why the Rebbe says these words, Vas faratishes bayin. Right? He's saying here, you want to know where is a person's will is at, look at their table. I mean, this is a very unique and unusual statement that the Rebbe makes here. You don't find it, I don't think you find it in any part of Jewish writing, or at least not, elaborately. Maybe in some Musar Sfarim, there's a little discussion about it, but not in Chassidus overall. And that's why it adds so much to the reason why the Isha Shunamis, says about this fellow, Ish Kodesh Elikim, he's a holy, godly man. Why? Because I look at his table and I see in his table holiness. To see holiness in the shul is no big deal. To see holiness in davening and learning is no big deal. But when you eat and you're with family and you're talking kind of TOT, down to earth, and over there you see holiness, you see that they're into healthy things, that's very special. And I believe that's what the Rebbe is also alluding to here, and what we could take in our life. Any comments, thoughts from anybody?
Beautiful stories.
Yoini, the purpose is not just stories, which, okay, thank you. It's really to use, we see so much unhealthy things in children and youth and teenagers, and we need to really hone in on the issues when the children are children and youth, and it's the system, the yeshiva system, and has not mastered this area. It's like, still cookie cutter schools, cookie cutter parents, everything is cookie cutter. And I understand that world. I come from that world. I really do. And my father wasn't bad and outrageous. He was just a Romanian European survivor, cookie cutter Jew. My mother was also a survivor, but somehow the Bina Yeseda Nitnal Isha, the extra dimension of comprehension, understanding given to women, she had, really. And she wasn't the provider, in the home. But she honed in and said, I saw this another example, going to the Rebbe. We lived in Borough Park, where I live now, right? We lived not in this house, but we lived in Borough Park. The Rebbe Farbrengt Shabbos. I wanted to be there. My father said, you go during the week. Stay home for Shabbos. I'm talking when I was 14, 15 years old. My mother said to my father, I remember like now, he spoke in the Polish Yiddish, Lassen gehen. Let him go. The mother, who has the motherly feelings, says to the father, let him go for Shabbos. And believe me, her yearning and longing was a lot more and deeper, like a mother, than my father. So these things left an impression, how she had the keen understanding that if this is the will of the child and the teenager, don't crush it. Work with it. Yes, Moshe. Moshe, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that every time we come to this point about the table, so I can't help but always recalling the words of Rabbi Avram Dr. Tursky, Alav Shalom, the quote that he said about how, studies show that the more times per week the family sits together and has supper, has dinner, the less amount of potential drug abuse there will be amongst the family, the children. I mean, this is just one little nakuda, but I always for years now I've drawn back to that, and the things that we're talking about right now are so precious and critical. It's like it's so on the one hand so obvious combined with just depth, and at the same time it's not obvious.
Right.
At the same time it's not obvious. And
Right.
It has to be always. It's just that we've been learning. We have to hear it and learn it again and again and again.
And to share the message with families, with parents, make time at the table, make it an experience. What we want to create is that our kids, as they leave the house, should have the feeling, I want to come back home to my parents' table. You see, then it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. They should know that they enjoy sitting at the table with the parents. They enjoy the schmoozing. They enjoy the camaraderie. They feel good about it. They don't feel like, ugh, I don't want to be there. What a waste of time. Then you won't have to. So Pesach comes, they want to be at the Seder. They don't want to go to Mexico and Tijuana and because they feel better being homey with parents, siblings, and friends. It can be created, but it takes work as they grow up. And that's it. Okay, Chevra. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Bye bye. Good night. Take care. Good day.